Everyone saw the headline. Alex Eala had secretly funded the tennis dreams of 50 Filipino kids, and the internet went absolutely wild. Shares in the millions, comment sections that read like eulogy threads. And yet, not a single credible outlet could verify a word of it. Here's the actual hot take. The speed at which this spread is not embarrassing for the people who shared it. It exposes a genuine gap in legitimate coverage of what Eala is doing for Filipino tennis. Fans believed it immediately because nothing in that story felt out of character. Eala has publicly called for sustained investment in young Filipino players. The inaugural Philippine Women's Open happened largely because of her presence. Statements about building the next generation date back to before she cracked the top 30 on March 16, 2026. The clickbait pages did not invent a stranger. They borrowed a real person's documented values and dressed them up in fiction. Before this breakdown continues, subscribe. This analysis is heading somewhere most channels would not go near. The secret was never really about 50 kids. It was always about something broader, quieter, and considerably harder to manufacture. That broader, quieter thing has a name. It is called structural influence, and Alex Eala has been exercising it at a level that no fabricated headline about 50 kids could ever accurately capture. Start with what is documented and verifiable. On March 16, 2026, Eala reached world number 29 in the WTA rankings, becoming the highest-ranked Filipino player in the history of the sport. That is not a milestone confined to women's tennis. That is the highest any player from the Philippines, male or female, has ever climbed in professional tennis. Full stop. For context, this is a country of 115 million people, a country with a deep sporting culture built around basketball and boxing, a country where tennis was treated for decades as background noise on the international stage. One athlete changed that calculation almost single-handedly, and she did it before turning 21. The clickbait version of this story needed Eala to write a check for 50 kids, because that is the kind of gesture audiences can visualize quickly. A philanthropic act, a moment, something that photographs well and reads cleanly in a 2-sentence post. The actual version is harder to package because it operates over years, not moments. But it is considerably more powerful once you understand the full scope of what has shifted because of her presence alone. Go back to January 2026. The Philippines hosted a WTA-sanctioned tournament for the first time in the country's history. The inaugural Philippine Women's Open was not a coincidence of scheduling or a random act of organizational goodwill from the WTA. It happened because Eala existed, because her ranking had climbed high enough to attract international attention to a market that was previously invisible to the tour's infrastructure. Tournament organizers, sponsors, and broadcasters do not invest in markets without reason. Eala became the reason. She entered that tournament as a wild card and reached the quarterfinals before losing to eventual champion Camila Osorio of Colombia. The result mattered far less than the surrounding context. Filipino players Teniel Matis, Elizabeth Abarquez, Kay Amana, and the doubles pairing of Angeline Alcala and Joanna Peña all competed on a WTA stage for the first time against world-ranked opponents. None of them won a match. Eala was direct about what that meant. She did not soften it or frame it as a feel-good participation story. She called it a wake-up call. Having a WTA tournament here is a huge stepping stone and a wake-up call, Eala said after her exit from that tournament. Filipinos are hardworking and passionate, and if we start to invest in our tennis players, we can slowly build more champions. That is not the language of a player cutting checks quietly backstage. That is the language of someone mapping out what genuine, long-term development actually requires. Sustained structural investment, consistent competitive exposure, and institutional commitment from private sponsors who are willing to back athletes before they have already proven themselves. This is where the conversation about Eala and Filipino tennis development gets genuinely uncomfortable for the people who run those clickbait operations, because the real story exposes exactly what those pages are designed to avoid: complexity. Eala's own path to world number 29 was not a product of government funding or national sporting infrastructure. Her father, Mike Eala, has been candid about the financial reality of raising an elite tennis player in the Philippines without reliable public support. Private sector backing filled the gap. Her mother, Riza Maniego Eala, was the CFO of Globe Telecom, one of the country's largest telecommunications companies, and Eala has been sponsored by Globe since she was 8 years old. Nike and Babolat came later. The Bank of the Philippine Islands, which shares a parent company with Globe, is also visible on her kit. These were not handouts. They were calculated investments made by corporations with the financial capacity to absorb the risk of backing an unproven young athlete, a capacity that most Filipino families trying to develop athletic talent simply do not have access to. Her uncle Noli Eala, former Philippine Sports Commission chairman, said it plainly. Very few companies have the resources to back athletes without certainty of a return. The ones that backed his daughter got lucky because she turned out to be generationally talented. The next Filipino kid with that kind of potential may never find a sponsor willing to take the same gamble, because the infrastructure to identify and develop them before they become obvious does not yet exist in the country at scale. This is the structural gap that the viral story about secretly funding 50 kids accidentally pointed at, without understanding what it was pointing at. At 13 years old, Eala moved to Mallorca, Spain, to train at the Rafael Nadal Academy after winning Les Petits As, a prestigious junior tournament for players aged 12 to 14. She reached a junior combined ranking of world number 2 by October 2020. In 2022, she became the first Filipino to win a major junior title, claiming the girls' singles championship at the US Open. After her victory, she addressed the crowd in Tagalog. That moment went viral in the Philippines, but it was a cultural flashpoint, not a development policy. The gap between that speech and the structural reality of Philippine tennis is enormous. Eala is not just aware of it, she has been actively drawing attention to it in interviews for years, with increasing directness as her platform has grown. The problem with that narrative is that it does not compress well into a Facebook post. Player calls for systemic investment in tennis infrastructure collects a fraction of the engagement that player secretly funds 50 kids' dreams generates in under 6 hours. What makes the Indian Wells period of March 2026 particularly relevant here is not just the ranking milestone, it is the scale of the cultural shift happening in real time around her. Fans were lining up outside Stadium 36 hours before Eala's second-round match against Diana Yastremska at the BNP Paribas Open. Hundreds of supporters in Filipino fan club shirts, carrying flags, waiting through 2 prior matches and a weather delay that pushed her contest into the cold desert night. Some of them stayed wrapped in blankets and winter coats just to watch her play. That kind of fandom does not organically generate itself around a tennis player from a country with no tennis tradition. It gets built brick by brick through results that force people to pay attention. Her Miami 2025 run was the moment that made the building visible to a global audience. Going in as a wild card, ranked number 140, she defeated Jelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, and Iga Swiatek, 3 former Grand Slam champions, in straight sets before losing to Jessica Pegula in the semifinals. The $332,160 prize money from that run nearly doubled her total career earnings up to that point. She climbed 71 ranking places in the aftermath. Then she reached her first WTA final at Eastbourne, won her first WTA 125 title at Guadalajara, and became the first player representing the Philippines to win a Grand Slam singles match in the Open era at the US Open. A victory over number 14 seed Clara Tauson that she described as one of the most emotional moments of her career. Every single one of those results did something for Filipino tennis that no one-time funding gesture could replicate. They created a proof of concept. They demonstrated to sponsors, tournament organizers, broadcasting networks, and aspiring young players across the Philippines that this was a viable path. Visibility at that level changes the conversation about whether private investment in Filipino athletic talent is worth pursuing. It does not guarantee results, but it creates the conditions under which results become possible. The clickbait pages that manufactured the 50 kids story understood none of this. They understood that Eala was popular. that Filipino audiences respond emotionally to content about her, and that a philanthropic framing would perform well with that demographic. What they produced was a story that actually diminished what she is doing by reducing it to a single transaction. A check for 50 kids is something any wealthy person can write. What Eala is building through her ranking, her results, her public advocacy, and the infrastructure her presence is dragging into existence is considerably harder to replicate and considerably harder to fake. She acknowledged the fake content problem directly after her exit from the Philippine Women's Open in January 2026. She described it as concerning, not because the stories are unflattering, but because they spread faster than accurate coverage and because audiences find it genuinely difficult to tell the difference. She encouraged people to seek out reliable sources and to be more discerning about what they share. Coming from a 20-year-old athlete managing the demands of a top 30 WTA career, that level of media literacy awareness says something about how seriously she takes the responsibility attached to her platform. It also says something about how little the clickbait economy cares about that responsibility. The 50 Kids story was not produced by someone trying to honor Eala. It was produced by someone who recognized that her name generates traffic and that traffic generates revenue. The emotional response of Filipino fans was the raw material. Their attachment to a genuine national hero was monetized without consent, credit, or accuracy. What is actually happening with Eala and the future of Filipino tennis is messier, slower, and more significant than any viral post will ever capture. A national WTA tournament now exists because of her. A generation of young players has watched someone who looks like them compete on the sport's biggest stages and win. The conversation about private sector investment in Filipino athletic talent has shifted, however incrementally, because her results have made the ROI argument easier to make. Sponsors who would never have considered tennis 5 years ago are now watching. None of that fits in a headline. None of it travels the way a fabricated act of charity does. But it is the real story, the one worth your time, the one with implications that extend well beyond a single player's career, and the one that will still be relevant long after the 50 Kids post has been flagged, forgotten, and replaced by the next manufactured moment. Eala did not secretly fund anything. What she did was considerably harder. She made an entire nation believe that Filipino tennis is worth funding at all. If this kind of coverage is what you have been looking for, facts examined from every angle without the manufactured emotion. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Every video on this channel is built the same way. Nothing invented, nothing softened, and no headline left unexamined.